Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Reverend Faith Fowler.
I'm here to talk about orgasm. And all night long, I've been sitting next to a high school freshman. When I was in 7th grade, I went to talk to the youth pastor at our church. And I told him right there in his office that I felt called by God. And he told me that I was wrong. I know. I mean, what do you do when your clergy person says you don't have any gifts or graces, that you're not fit to serve in the church, that you're just not right? What do you do? What do you think? I didn't tell anybody after that, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't speak of it in junior high or senior high or college. People over the years have said to me, well, maybe he thought that you couldn't be a preacher because you were a girl. And I thought, well, I never met a woman minister. I never heard a woman preach. I didn't have any clergy in my family, so who was I to think that maybe I was called? But I'd like to give him, the chance, or at least the out, that maybe it wasn't because I was a girl at all. Perhaps it was because I was introverted. I was painfully shy. I didn't come out of the religious closet until after college. I was working 2 jobs to try and make enough money to go on to graduate school. And one of them put me in a suburban church where I was the youth advisor, which meant I took kids roller skating to find Jesus. And he was as theologically different from me as night is from day. But one day he came into me and he said he was going on vacation. Could I preach? And I thought, well, that youth pastor, he said I shouldn't. And so I said yes. But then I struggled a little bit on picking a text and making a theme and throwing together a sermon. Ultimately, it was done, and on that Sunday morning, I delivered something very short and very shallow and slightly plagiarized to my parents and everybody else who had gathered. But from that moment on, I knew that I was meant to go to seminary, so I started looking for a school, and I ended up picking Boston University. Yeah. Thank you, George. I'll buy you a drink later. And I picked Boston because it was known for the social gospel and social justice. I mean, they talked at Boston about reading the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Boston University was known for Howard Thurman as the dean of the chapel, and Elie Wiesel, who talked about history and hatred, and Bayou is where Dr. King got his doctorate. When I got there in August, it was a hotbed of activity that I really wasn't used to. Not only were we talking about civil rights and gender studies, people were off to El Salvador. Folks were protesting nuclear war and nuclear waste. By the second week of school, I was in the field education office, and I told them I wanted to go into prison ministry. They sent me to Walpole Prison. It's the Jackson of Massachusetts, 800 men incarcerated for long periods of time, if not life, and violent crime. And just like I didn't have a woman minister in my family, I didn't have anybody I was related to who had ever been to prison. And so it was foreign, it was frightening. It was long before I read Michelle Alexander and the New Jim Crow. Way before I read Orange is the New Black. Yeah, it is. I remember driving up the first few times, and there were the rolling razor wire and the tall, guard towers that were armed people up there, and getting out of my car and walking into the administration building that was stark white, and you went inside, you presented your ID, and you signed off on all your rights, and then you took off everything basically that you had on except, just your clothes. You stood in line with strangers, and you entered the trap, which is this long hallway that has electronic gates or doors on both ends, and once you're inside, they slam them both shut. And the one side, the long side of the rectangle, is bulletproof glass, and behind the glass are the guards. And then I recalled reading in the paper I signed that they had the right to look into my body cavities. I'm a pretty private person. I don't even like my dentist looking at my cavities. Finally, they let us out, and we went out into the yard, and you look at the grass, and you look at the sky, the green and the blue, like you've never seen them before. And maybe thinking, what if I never see them again? And into the main building where the general population is, and right off to the right, at least in Walpole, there's the visitor room, and there are guards there, and there are tables and chairs and vending machines, and everything is bolted down as if to say to you non-verbally, when you get inside, don't move. Don't hold a hand. Don't touch a head. Because I was a seminarian, I was allowed to go to all the cell blocks to see the general population. And they were all the same, really, 3 tiers, and each tier ended with cells, with the bars, the institutional glossy gray. And inside, just like the visitors' room, everything was fixed in place, the bed and the desk and the toilet and the sink. Because I was an intern from Boston, I was sent occasionally down to cell block 10, which was the isolation unit. And there the men were caged, really, for 23 hours at a time. And because of that, I was a really popular visitor, although I didn't have leather pants or high. Every woman looks good in prison, so if you're looking for someplace... But on the isolation unit, the thing I really liked about it is that there was no room for shallow talk. That nobody could talk to you about their wife or their partner or their kids or their car or their job or the house or the weather or sports. They were divorced from everything we occupy our days talking about. They couldn't talk about it because they were not related to any of it. And so you had to, whether you were religious or not, and many people claim to be not religious, although most of our talks seem to be sacred there. We talked about life and death and mistakes and love. My favorite place to go in Walpole was to a program called Sesame Street. It was right next to the visitors' room. It was actually attached, but there were no guards inside. It was a program for the kids, because you don't think about kids visiting prison unless you've been there, and then you know that they visit all the time. Some kids do. And so they were able to go into this room that had arts and crafts, glitter and glue and construction paper and games like Chutes and Ladders and Go Fish and, sports equipment for simple things. And I loved it because if I was scared, to be 5 or 6. And how sterile that place was for little kids. And by having the kids have a place to go, we called it Sesame Street, by the way. which is a great program, 50 years old. It meant the adults could talk alone. I remember being a kid and my parents sending me out to play so they could talk alone. Adults need that time. But most importantly for me, I think, was that the men in Sesame Street, the inmates of Sesame Street, ran the program. They got a chance to lead, to make decisions, and to nurture children even though they weren't their own. And I thought that was just wonderful, that men need kids and kids need men. So Sesame Street is where I met Woody. And Woody was clean cut. He was always in Sesame Street anyway, in blue jeans and a t-shirt. He looked like he could have been on the set of Happy Days. And he was playing football, just a light game of catch with a little boy who turned out to be 7 years old. And at one pass, the boy missed and actually went up and slammed down on the floor and then screamed. And if you ever want to get attention inside a prison, scream. Every set of eyes, every head, every body will flank to where that sound is coming from. And that's what happened with Woody and this child. Only Woody didn't turn, he ran. He lunged towards the little boy and picked him up, scooped him up in his arms and said to him, "Here." And he took his hand and he rubbed it along his head. It had a scar. And by feeling that scar, the little boy became instantly quiet, as if he knew that Woody understood what it was to have pain. Now, here's the thing I know about Woody. He got the scar in Vietnam. And the scar the little boy touched was probably the first thing to heal, because some things never healed for Woody. He came home from Hanoi, but he never stopped fighting. That aggression was the reason he was in Walpole prison. For most of the men I didn't know. They didn't tell me and I didn't ask. I didn't feel like I had the right to ask. But there was one man, one afternoon, I knew right away who he was and what he was convicted of doing. I was in the chapel setting up chairs in a circle for Bible study, because you have to have a circle for Bible study, right? I don't know why that is, but it seems to be true. And in he walks, and I know right away because I've seen the evening news for months now. I've seen the newspapers, the headlines, the pictures. I've had to stand in grocery stores and look at tabloids every single week that told the sordid, sensational details about this man who was coming into the chapel. I knew him. I knew his name. I knew he was married. His wife's name was Nancy. They had 3 kids. They lived in Sharon, close to Walpole, not far, a suburb from Boston. He was a professor. He was a researcher. He had an office downtown. And one day, he left his office and he went to the zone, the combat zone. And he picked up a prostitute. "21 years old. And he started seeing her almost every day. He became infatuated with her. He became obsessed with her. He was paying her $100 an hour whether they had sex or not. The bill got so high that he started embezzling money from Tufts University. I don't know what you said, but it would be funny. Embezzling money from Tufts University to the tune of $68,000 in a year. I know I shouldn't say orgasm right now, but I'm so tempted. She came to his house in March. She wanted $5,000 more. She said he owed it to her. And he took a sledgehammer and bludgeoned her to death. The blow was so hard, so intense, that it shattered her skull and her brains came out. I knew it. The newspapers told me so. Then he wrapped her up in a kid's sleeping bag and blankets, and he dragged her through the house like a deer that's been shot during hunting season, and he loaded her up into the hatchback of her Toyota car, and he began driving, frantically driving, up towards Boston, then back down I-95, looking for dumpsters, and he starts throwing out the stuff. He throws out her purse, he throws out the bloody blankets, he throws out the sledgehammer, and there's a thud when it hits the bottom of the can, evidently. And then finally, he disposes of her body. He's in an alley, and he loads it into a trash receptacle and puts trash on top of her and keeps driving. He ends up in New York City before he finally discards the car. That's the man. He's 300 pounds. He sits down in the circle 8 feet from me. When we're giving introductions, he says, "My name is William Douglas." I knew it. I think everybody knew it. I could be wrong, but I certainly knew it. And he doesn't say anything else for the whole time we're in Bible study. I don't remember what I say at all. I'm just hoping he hasn't noticed that my eyes have been watching him since the minute he hit the door, and I'm trying desperately to hold on to a game face so he won't know how scared I am. And it's done, and he's gone, and I'm home. And two nights later, I guess I was thinking about it. I have this dream. I don't often remember my dreams. I dream in black and white, and who wants to remember dreams when we've got cable with 100 tables in color? But my REM sleep is interrupted by a dream, and in the dream, I'm driving a car. I've got the steering wheel with my left hand, and I'm taking my right hand, and I'm lunging, hitting, and it's like the shower scene from Psycho, where you just see that silhouette of the weapon and the arm. And I'm driving frantically, and I start looking for dumpsters, and I begin throwing out, the weapon and the clothes, and finally the body parts. And in Psycho, you've got that music, that awful, eerie music going on. In my dream, I'm unfortunate, not only in terms of color, but in terms of sound. It's more like being underwater and sort of that white noise. Nothing's going on until I hear this scream. And I jump up from where I'm sitting, and I wake up from my sleep, and all of a sudden I realize the voice is mine. I'm screaming right in place, right in my bedroom. And I think to myself that this man has scared me to death. I think Robin's 21 and I'm 23. Maybe I'm not safe at Walpole. Maybe I can't go back to Walpole. Maybe I can't be in the same room with him ever again. I am not able to go back to sleep that night. I'm not able to sleep for the next couple nights. I don't eat much. I don't study much, although I didn't need very many excuses. I'm petrified. I was literally drenched in sweat. The Epiphany doesn't happen for a couple days. The Epiphany is this. In the dream, William Douglas isn't killing me. I'm killing somebody else. I'm assaulting someone else. I'm not even sure it's Bill Douglas. And maybe it's not, I'm identifying with Robin, who's my age, but I'm putting myself together with Bill, who's had all the privileges I have had. He's middle class, he's had great education, he's esteemed by the world, like seminarians and pastors, Maybe for the first time I'm realizing that I'm capable of awful, heinous, deadly, murderous crimes, that I have it within me, and that I stand in need of grace. Just like everybody else. And that I should be very slow to judge somebody by their worst day. And once that epiphany happens, I'm able to go back to Walpole. I go twice a week for 3 years. I don't miss any days. I almost missed one. My car was broken down. But somehow the word got out through the grapevine that I didn't have transportation. And an inmate called his wife, and she called me, and she lent me her moped. Let me tell you, if you want to be scared, take a moped 90 miles down a highway meant for, 55 an hour traffic with no helmet. William Douglas stayed at Walpole for a year. And then he was transferred to a medium security prison and totally spent 9 years, half of his 18 to 20 year manslaughter sentence. That's a whole nother story about injustice and justice. He got time off for good behavior. He taught community college classes while in. His wife, Nancy, divorced him, but somebody, a woman by the name of Bonnie Jean, met him in the community college courses he was teaching inside and married him before he got out. In case you're looking for somebody. Robin Benedict, the 21-year-old graphic designer who became a hooker, they never found her body. The authorities assumed that dumpster got unloaded in the local landfill, and it took Bill a year to confess, and so by the time he told them where she was probably too deep or too decomposed, too expensive to recover, and so her family never had a real funeral. Woody, my veteran friend, most recently I've heard from him, he's in Arkansas, but my last memory of him really is in Sesame Street. It's a Wednesday afternoon and the kids have gone, and we're sitting there alone together, sort of tidying up the room, and I was lamenting to him that I wasn't sure I'd ever get a church, that in the Methodist system, you get appointed to a church, you just don't go find one. And I was explaining that to him, and he listened as if he understood my pain and my anxiety. And then he said to me, well, if the bishop doesn't give you a church, we'll steal you one. Which had never occurred to me till then. I'm still introverted. I'll be introverted till the day I die. I rarely have nightmares anymore. But I'm here to tell you my time with William and Woody, and indirectly with Robin and Nancy and so many others at Walpole, taught me to struggle with restorative justice. And that time together is the reason why I preach about God's amazing grace. I've done so now for 33 years. Thank you.
Reverend Faith Fowler.